It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Disaster in the Channel with a dozen dead, the majority women, after a migrant boat ripped apart.
Once again, the sea, the channel that we love so much, has become a place where men, women and children die at the hands of smugglers, who are the real criminals.
5 children arrested in Leicestershire after an 80-year-old grandfather is killed while walking his dog. A 14-year-old remains in custody tonight. Dodging a war crime warrant in Mongolia, President Putin unleashes a devastating attack on Ukraine. On the eve of a major report into the Grenfell disaster, we speak to the families still living in unsafe buildings. Plus, the surge in snatch crime and how your stolen phone might end up in China. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello, good evening. Only last week, the Prime Minister and the French President met in Paris to signal their joint resolve to tackle the migrant crisis in the Channel. Today, another devastating indication of the scale of the challenge ahead. After a dozen people, the majority women and children, died after their boat ripped apart. Many more were rescued from the sea. Well, the incident happened near the coast of Le Portel in northern France. A large search and rescue operation took place throughout the day. The French coastguard have said urgent medical attention is being provided at a facility at Boulogne-sur-Mer. Well, our international affairs correspondent John Sparks joins us live now from Boulogne. And John, another tragic reminder as people smugglers cram more and more people dangerously onto these inadequate vessels.
Oh, that's right, Anna. It is absolutely horrifying. It's an awful incident, but I don't think people here in northern France will be that shocked. I don't think they'll be that surprised. And it was people here in northern France who first saw this boat in distress. They saw the passengers in distress in the late hours of this morning. The floor of the boat, they often have plexiglass floors in these boats. It had ripped in two. The boat had capsized, throwing more than 70 people into the sea. And this evening, the prosecutor here in Boulogne-sur-Mer, he has confirmed that at least 12 people have lost their lives. 10 of those people are female, some adults, some children, primarily from Eritrea in East Africa. We also understand that there were no life jackets on board. I can also tell you that the search has now been called off. We have just had that from the authorities. The search called off after what has been another tragic day in the English Channel. This incident is both horrifying and utterly familiar. Many losing their lives after a boat packed with migrants sank off northern France. The authorities alerted just before noon as an overloaded craft ripped, then capsized southwest of Calais. The authorities sent multiple vessels and search helicopters to the passengers' aid, and dozens were plucked from the sea.
This morning is a tragedy that affects us all. I'd like to thank all the emergency services who risked their lives to save these people. Of course, these 12 deaths are to be deplored. Once again, the sea, the channel that we love so much, has become a place where men, women and children die at the hands of smugglers, who are the real criminals.
And as the first casualties were brought ashore, many needed emergency treatment. They were brought here to Boulogne, where the French set up an advanced medical post to treat the survivors. 50 people triaged, then treated at the port. It's not uncommon. This place used to rescue operations, but they've never dealt with anything this big here. After several days of calm seas, conditions in the Channel have worsened, the French describing the Channel as agitated. But the people smugglers didn't think to wait.
In any situation of rescue, if a rescue is needed, and in this circumstance, it sounds that something very catastrophic took place, and I would guess that most of the people that were involved in this would definitely want to be rescued. With this many people, it would be a sort of multi-agency operation, so a lot of different resources would need to be scrambled to be able to cope with such a large-scale situation.
While governments change, the lure of a new life in Britain does not. In Dover, we saw migrants from other small boats who had made the journey across. Figures show that since Labour took power in early July, nearly 8,000 have crossed the Channel by small boats. This a human and a political problem that is very difficult to solve.
These dangerous boat crossings are being facilitated for financial reward by smuggling gangs who don't care about the safety of the people that they are cramming onto boats, often over-cramming onto boats and causing these dangerous crossings. And it's that we've got to stop happening in the future.
Promises made by the British and the French to stop this deadly trade remain an aspiration. You know, as you would expect from an event, from an incident this distressing, we have had plenty of comment and some debate from public officials and government ministers as well. The UK Border Security Minister this evening, Angela Eagles, says that she has seen a distressing evidence that these boats are becoming increasingly overloaded, that the quality of these vessels is deteriorating. She says she's really concerned about that. We've also heard from the Interior Minister in France. He's called for increased cooperation. He says that the UK and the France have to work together. They have no choice, he says, if they're going to stop incidents, awful incidents like this from happening.
John in Boulogne, thank you. A 14-year-old remains in police custody over the murder of a pensioner in Leicestershire who was attacked as he walked his dog. 80-year-old Bimsen Kohli was attacked in Braunston Town on Sunday evening and died in hospital last night. Leicestershire police have now launched a murder investigation and referred themselves to the police watchdog because they'd had prior contact with the victim. 5 children were initially arrested. 4 have now been released with no further action. Sky's Becky Cottrell has more.
Bimsen Kohli was an active 80-year-old who loved walking his dog and spending time at his allotment. On Sunday, what should have been a short stroll across the park became a tragedy. Police say a group of young people attacked Mr. Kohli just metres from his home and then fled. He later died in hospital.
He was talking to us every time when he goes to the allotment. So I know he was very skinny. I used to call a wrestler, you know. Are you a wrestler? Yeah, he's a family man. Yeah, he was a very nice man. Yeah, very nice. It's really shocking what happened, you know.
Just awful. It's horrible. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, really. It's just horrible.
A neighbour close to Mr. Kohli's family said he'd sustained a serious neck injury in the attack. His 3 children and grandchildren now have to wait for answers as they start to grieve. And some locals are frightened.
This was the shortest way to the school to drop my kids off, but knowing this now, I'm just going to take the longer one. I'm not going to risk it anymore.
Because what are you scared about?
Just, I think it's in general, because if it could have happened to someone that's 80-year-old, why wouldn't it happen to someone that has kids? And do you know what I mean? Why would it target someone that's an 80-year-old, a gentleman? What would stop them from attacking me with my kids?
We understand Bimsen Kohli was originally from India, but had lived in the UK for decades.
One of his relatives told me he was a respected member of the community. He'd owned a knitwear factory, but had retired a decade ago to enjoy time with his family.
Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Leicester.
Vladimir Putin received the red carpet treatment in Mongolia today as the government there ignored calls for him to be arrested on a warrant for alleged war crimes in Ukraine. And with the Russian president seemingly at liberty to travel abroad, in Ukraine itself, a Russian strike killed 51 people and wounded 271 in a central region of the country. Well, in the deadliest attack carried out by Russia since the beginning of the year, 2 ballistic missiles struck a Ukrainian military academy and nearby hospital in the Poltava region. Here's our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn.
For a fugitive from international justice, it was quite a welcome. Flowers, handshakes and kisses. The Mongolian military was out in force, but not to arrest the alleged war criminal, greeting Vladimir Putin with a marching band and full honour guard instead. If the Russian leader was worried, he wasn't showing it, and for good reason. This was his first visit to a member country of the International Criminal Court. But Mongolia wouldn't dare provoke such a powerful neighbour. Putin was flaunting his impunity, while his military was carrying out more atrocities in Ukraine. One of the worst series of air attacks since the war began. In Zaporizhia, yet another civilian building hit by Putin's missiles overnight, killing a mother and her 8-year-old boy. Another civilian killed in a city nearby. Then today, more than 40 killed by ballistic missiles here at a military academy in the city of Poltava. Ukraine restrictions mean we can't show the extent of the damage, but it was the worst single loss of life in the war this year. The war, though, is going both ways. Almost a month since Ukrainian forces invaded and seized an enclave of Russia. Ukraine's president told Sky's US partners NBC television that that operation is not over yet.
We
don't need the Russian territory. Our operation is aimed to restore our territorial integrity. We capture Russian troops to replace them with the Ukrainian. We tell them, we need our military soldiers in exchange with the Russian ones. The same attitude is to the territories. We don't need their land.
For his part, Vladimir Putin seems undaunted, defying international efforts to stop him, and now finding more allies willing to help him. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Tomorrow we'll see the publication of a landmark report into the Grenfell fire, more than 7 years on from the tragedy in which 72 people died. It's expected to name and shame those responsible for the safety failures which led to the deaths. But Sky News can reveal that laws introduced since to force building owners to fix serious safety issues are being ignored. Sky's communities correspondent Becky Johnson has been speaking to some of those still living in unsafe buildings.
It's something you think about every day. The best we've got is that a fire hasn't happened.
Steph is trapped in a building that's unsafe.
They've found issues with all the panels above the windows.
She bought this flat in Bristol unaware of the risks, before more stringent checks brought in after the Grenfell fire revealed the issues here. She was one of the first people in the country to use new post-Grenfell laws to take her building owner to court, and won. But the owner failed to show up at court, hasn't replied to the many efforts by residents to contact them since. And the deadline set by the judge to complete the work has now passed, yet nothing has been done.
When you talk to somebody that isn't in this situation, it's actually really difficult to get across the severity of it and how it makes you feel, because they just go, well, surely somebody's going to make sure they do that. And you go, yeah, I've knocked on every door, we have, and they're all just shut.
The building owner has also failed to respond to Sky News. Steph can't sell her flat because no mortgage lender will go near it. There are thousands of other buildings around the country where lives are also at risk because building owners have delayed or disappeared. This huge fire in Dagenham last month, where overdue work was still taking place to remove combustible cladding, has reinforced the fear of those who know their building could be next.
Not only do we have the same cladding as was present at Grenfell, but also the same polystyrene insulation.
People won't believe that buildings still have that exact type of cladding.
Well, unfortunately, that's the sad fact.
Paul keeps all his essentials handy.
So this is what we keep beside the bed: the wallet with the passport, some cash, driving licence, car keys, house keys, mobile phone.
The owner of his building in Birmingham claims it plans to carry out the work later this year.
It is very, very stressful. It's very worrying. You live with it all the time.
For people who survived the Grenfell fire, the lack of action since has been shocking. Emma escaped from the 20th floor that night.
I can never look at a tower block the same way. Remove the cladding, stop putting
money before people's lives, listen to what people want, stop charging people.
As the report is due to name and shame those responsible for Grenfell, the tragedy is being compounded by multiple failures across the UK to prevent another disaster. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
Well, our correspondent Matthew Thompson is at Grenfell Tower for us tonight. And this, Matthew, the critical phase 2 of this inquiry, examining how a highly combustible cladding system came to be on a high-rise residential building with clearly appalling consequences.
Yes, that's exactly right. So phase 1 of the inquiry looked at the events of the night itself. Phase 2 has gone deeper, wider into how the tragedy occurred, how it was allowed to occur, you might even say. And what tomorrow's report will not do is point a single finger of blame. The Grenfell tragedy is best understood as a systems failure, a deadly combination of failures of regulation, failures of business practices, basic human failings, you might even say. And so the report tomorrow is likely to spread blame far and wide. Some 250 people have already been warned by the inquiry that they might face criticism, and almost certain to feature are business executives, companies like Arconic that sold the highly flammable cladding despite some evidence that they knew it was dangerous, companies like Kingspan and Celotex that made the flammable insulation, the Royal Borough of Kensington-Chelsea, the council who undertook the refurbishment and signed off on the completed project, even the UK government who were warned that the fire safety regime needed a complete overhaul. There are just so many layers of responsibility here. And then it's also important to understand that the fallout from the Grenfell tragedy will not end tomorrow. Once the inquiry's work concludes, the process of criminal justice can begin. And the Metropolitan Police has already said that some 58 individuals and 19 organisations are suspected of criminal offences. No doubt officers will pore over the findings tomorrow. Charges may well follow, but it may be some time, possibly even years, before we see any criminal trials.
Matthew, at Grenfell, thank you. Well, we will have full coverage, reaction and analysis of the Grenfell Tower report on Sky News. That's from 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. Hamas today stepped up their propaganda campaign against Israel, releasing a video of one of the 6 Israeli hostages whose bodies were found at the weekend. We don't know the circumstances in which it was filmed, but in the video, Eden Yerushalmi directed a message at Benjamin Netanyahu, asking him to do what is necessary to get them released. Our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle has been speaking to a family member of another of these 6 hostages as the pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister continues to grow.
Carmel Gat was one of the 6 hostages killed by Hamas last week. When I last saw her cousin Shay, only a few weeks ago, she told us how Carmel would be staying strong by teaching yoga to her fellow hostages. But most of all, she kept telling us that she was just looking forward to hugging her cousin again. Yesterday, they buried Carmel near her parents' home on the kibbutz, where she was taken from on October the 7th.
You know, I will never be able to hug Carmel again, but there are so many people who still can. And for their sake, I want to make it clear. A deal is what brings you back alive, and war is what kills you. All I want is this suffering to end.
On Monday evening, Hamas published a video of another of the hostages, Eden Yerushalmi. This short clip was authorized for release by her family.
אני רוצה לפנות למשפחה היקרה שלי, שאני כל כך אוהבת ואני מתגעגעת אליכם, אמא, אבא, שני, מאי, אני אוהבת אתכם כל כך, כל כך, כל כך, ואני מתגעגעת אליכם.
Hamas has released another video tonight. The families say it is psychological torture. Benjamin Netanyahu asked for the forgiveness of the families of those 6 people. Do you forgive him?
No. His decision-making caused Carmel's death. It's that simple.
Tel Aviv tonight is once again the scene of anti-government protests. and major roads are blocked for the fourth day in a row. Police fought to keep control, wading in with horses and on foot. The crowd surrounded them, angry and refusing to give ground.
The atmosphere tonight is not like other nights. The police have tried to put out the fires twice. They've failed every time. They've been blocked by the protesters, who have then chased them to the other side of the street. And it's the protesters pushing the police back.
Netanyahu will believe he can ride this out, as he has many protests before in his long political career. But they're not going away quietly when lives are still at stake. And with political leaders inside and outside of Israel pushing Netanyahu to do a deal, he can't easily dismiss this as just a loud left-wing minority. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Tel Aviv.
The race to become the next Conservative leader will see its first casualty tomorrow as MPs meet to vote out one of the 6 candidates. Tonight, those 6 hopefuls have been making a final pitch at a hustings event in Westminster. Our deputy political editor, Sam Coates, is there for us tonight. So a 2-month process from here, Sam. How is stage 1 of voting shaping up?
That's right, a little bit before 4 o'clock in Committee Room 14 in the Commons behind me tomorrow. The results of the vote by the 121 remaining Tory MPs will reveal which of the 6 leadership candidates to be the next head of the Tory party will be evicted. And if it sounds a little bit like a TV game show, that's because the artifice, the skullduggery, means it is a bit like one. We'll find out tomorrow who will be the weakest link. We could find out tomorrow which 2 contenders go through to the vote at home for Tory members that will take place in October before the result is announced in November. To be honest, Anna, it's a mug's game trying to predict who's going to come out on top and who will be thrown out of the contest tomorrow. But what I can tell you is this. Listening to the speeches and the questions and hearing about the hustings of this contest, it has been dominated by the very topics that tore the Conservative Party apart in the run-up to the general election. This contest has been dominated by the migration cap and whether there should be one. It's been dominated by whether or not Britain should stay in or leave the European Convention of Human Rights. It really hasn't, in any substantial way, touched the subject of the economy, the single biggest reason why people choose who they vote for in a general election. I think that tells you one of the reasons why the Conservative Party has a huge journey, whoever it picks at the end of this contest, before it's ready to contest power again.
Sam, will stay tuned to Committee Room 14. Thank you. The mother of baby P has returned to prison 2 years after being released on licence following a second breach of her bail conditions. Tracy Connolly was convicted in 2009 of causing or allowing the death of her son Peter following months of abuse. The revoking of her licence was authorised by the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood. 2 teenagers have appeared in court charged with the murder of a 13-year-old boy in Albury in the West Midlands. Jazir Koch died after he was stabbed at his home last Thursday. A man in his 40s has also been charged with assisting an offender and will appear in court tomorrow. An inquest into the death of a guest following his appearance on the Jeremy Kyle show has heard how he felt thrown under a bus by the makers of the programme. Steve Diamond is believed to have committed suicide a week after filming the ITV show back in 2019. A massive rise in bag and phone snatch thefts has prompted the government to promise a crackdown on street crime. There were more than 200 a day in the year leading up to March 2024, according to the latest Home Office figures. That's more than double the previous year and is thought to be fuelled by a lucrative market for the stolen goods, particularly in China. Sajid Chowdhury reports.
Watch this without blinking. Passwords, photographs, private information, all gone in a split second. Phone snatching has become so common, some people have had it happen to them more than once.
Where do I begin? So I had 2 phones stolen.
Both times from busy streets in central London.
Just the distress, the thought you're left helpless, there's nothing you can do. Can't get home, you can't call anyone. Got pictures of my passport, my home address, my mum's home address, my dad's address.
Like many victims, Abdul began getting messages urging him to remotely wipe his phone's security settings.
They pretend that it comes from Apple support. The third message is when he starts to threaten me. And this is like, yeah, I'm going to wreck your life, blah, blah, blah. You're going to be destroyed. I've killed far less for an effing phone, blah, blah, blah. I know where you live. Your whole family are going to be slaughtered, beaten, raped. I mean, yeah. Yeah. And then he sends this video with a guy with a gun.
These messages may be familiar to thousands of others. Last year, 78,000 phones and bags were snatched from streets across England and Wales. And like in Abdul's case, many of them are taken out of the country. Both of his phones ended up here at an address at Huaqiang South Road in Shenzhen in China.
They're paying there multiple times before it finally went dead.
Phone thefts tend to happen by thieves on overpowered illegal e-bikes. And while a phone is reported stolen every 7 minutes in England and Wales, only 1% of thefts result in a charge.
We've just picked them up on camera.
In the City of London Police control room, thieves are chased down by cameras as soon as a call comes in.
Generally, the people that take them, they are affiliated to gangs some of the time. They're generally young people, so it's where we start talking about county line influences. This size and the sheer scale of it nationally now, it's got to be well organised.
Stolen phones can be used to access bank details, money, emails and social media data. But staying ahead of criminals isn't straightforward.
If you're a normal person, you'll have 3 or 4 cards maybe to cancel, plus maybe 30 or 40 passwords to change and a SIM. Doing that on a phone when you can't do your authentication through your app, that can take you a few hours, meaning that the criminal has that long to use those credentials.
The government says it wants to take on the illegal market. It's convening tech companies, phone manufacturers and police chiefs to explore ideas. Abdul says he's learnt to stay safe in public, keeping his focus on his surroundings. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News in London.
Britain is on course to build 9 new offshore wind farms after an auction to secure clean energy projects achieved record results. The government has called it a major step forward in making the country a clean energy superpower. But analysts and campaigners fear it's not enough. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, has more.
Okay, I'm just going to go down to 400, Tom, on the radar.
It's a half-hour journey by helicopter to the world's largest offshore wind farm. Flying 60 miles over the North Sea safely relies on decades of experience borrowed from offshore oil and gas, whose platforms pass below us on our way to the industry poised to replace it.
These turbines are just enormous. From the tip of the blade to the sea is 200 metres. And one rotation of the turbine generates enough electricity to power a home for 24 hours. And there are 340 turbines in this Hornsey wind farm zone.
But there'll need to be a hell of a lot more of them to meet the government's pledge for a zero-carbon electricity grid. The UK's current offshore wind capacity is almost 15 gigawatts. Another 13 is in construction or has been committed to between now and 2030. This latest government auction for new offshore contracts has just secured an additional 5. But this still leaves a 22 gigawatt shortfall if we're to hit the 2030 target of 55.
We've got the GB Energy Bill, Great British Energy Bill, being debated in the House of Commons on Thursday. And we will be working with developers and industry to say, how do we make sure that in future auction rounds we absolutely meet what is required for our 2030 clean power target, which is so important to getting off volatile fossil fuels.
It's good news for Ørsted, the Danish firm that built and operates the Hornsey project. It now has contracts to more than double its size. But because last year's auction failed to secure any new projects for the sector, it's an uphill climb.
We must see the pace of deployment step up. We need to recover from that gap, and we need to set ourselves on a path where we can reliably commit several gigawatts every year as part of making this journey towards a different electricity system.
More subsidy from bill payers helps, but there remains a shortage of skills, ports and supply chains. And one of the biggest challenges to overall delivery isn't out here in the North Sea.
For all technologies, we need to be able to build stuff faster and connect it to the grid. There are sometimes 15-year delays to connecting to the grid in this country, and a lot of that is because of regulatory process. So we're hoping to speed up grid connections and we're hoping to speed up consents to build projects.
The government says it has a clear plan for affordable net zero electricity before the next decade, but it will take more than a fair wind to deliver. Tom Clark, Sky News, the North Sea.
Queen Camilla has given a positive update on the King's health as she visited a new cancer centre in Bath today.
Is he okay?
Yeah, let's just do it.
She had this exchange while meeting patients and staff at Bath's Royal United Hospital before officially opening the new cancer centre. The Queen is continuing to lead royal engagements while King Charles and the Princess of Wales both receive their own treatment for cancer. Now, in the Paralympics, Faye Rogers won gold for Great Britain in the S10 100 metres butterfly final. She finished just half a second ahead of teammate Callie-Anne Warrington. Canada's Katie Cosgriff won bronze. And wheelchair racer Sammy Kinghorn secured her second silver of the Games in the women's T54 1500 metres, but she was 2 seconds slower than the new Paralympic record set by Swiss gold medalist Catherine de Bruyne. Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda, and the broadcast journalist and commentator, Ali Miraj. Among the stories we will be discussing this on the front of The Times, which says the US and the UK are at odds over arms sales to Israel. All of that and more after this.
won, and she had to justify it.
Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories tonight. 12 people have died after a boat carrying 65 migrants sank off the French coast while attempting to cross the Channel. Ukraine's First Lady has called a Russian ballistic missile strike a stunning tragedy for all of Ukraine, after at least 50 were killed and 270 people injured in the central town of Poltava. And the long-awaited second report into the Grenfell Tower fire will be published tomorrow, nearly 2 years since the end of the second phase of the inquiry. Well, hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Soda, and the broadcaster and commentator, Ali Miraj. Welcome and great to see both of you. So as ever, let's take a look at the front pages for tomorrow's newspapers. The Guardian leading on the Channel tragedy that saw at least 12 people, including women and children, killed after their boat tore apart. The front of the Mirror shows the 80-year-old grandfather who was killed while walking his dog. The Metro reports on the inquest into a man who died a week after appearing on the Jeremy Kyle show 5 years ago in 2019. The Eye reports on calls for prosecutions for those responsible for the Grenfell fire safety failures ahead of tomorrow's release of the final report by the public inquiry into the tragedy. Angela Rayner in talks to end Thatcher's right to buy policy. That is the lead story for The Telegraph. The Times, which says the US and UK are at odds over arms sales to Israel. The Financial Times reports new regulation to bolster the payouts banks and financial companies have to pay to fraud victims has been scaled back after pressure from business. The surprising Surrey suburb that mafia outlaws are migrating to lay undercover. That's in the Star. It's Woking, if you were wondering, I think. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. Let's head straight to Sonia and to Ali. Welcome to both of you. And Ali, why don't you kick off with the Times, these differences and the repercussions after the Starmer government decided to withdraw certain export licences for military equipment to Israel?
Well, this is right. This is David Lammy yesterday making an announcement that 30 out of 350 export licenses would be revoked. This is on the grounds of, as we understand it, legal advice that has been given to the government. This is not an arms embargo. This is not a blanket ban. We should put it in context. The previous governments in this country have done similar things. And look, I think the question really is whether this is really legal or not. Now, the government is saying it is. It should publish a legal advice. It would be much better if we could all see it. The US is saying that it does not believe that there is any legal basis for this whatsoever. Indeed, they're coming out and basically saying, John Kirby, spokesman for the US National Security Council, saying there has been no determination by the United States that they have violated international humanitarian law. Now, what Lammy is saying is that there could be a potential use of these weapons at some point that could breach humanitarian law. It hasn't been breached yet, but it could be. And on that basis, they're not doing it. Now, some people are saying this is all about internal Labour Party management. They know that they were vulnerable during the general election. They lost some seats to pro-Gaza MPs. They've formed their own little group now. And this is about quelling internal unrest within the Labour Party.
Yeah, the difficulty is, of course, America has ironclad guarantees to Israel. They've made that quite clear under Joe Biden. And actually, Daniel Finkelstein on the radio this evening suggesting that if you appoint an Attorney General who is Jewish but against the Netanyahu government, you're going to get a result like this. But are there repercussions? You know, is it just enough to quell the pro-Palestinian feelings amongst Labour MPs and just little enough to thoroughly upset the Israeli government?
Yeah, well, it's a very tricky one, isn't it? Because it is just 30 out of 350. So within the Labour Party, in terms of those internal politics, on the one hand, you've got some MPs and Labour supporters who are saying this is terrible because it sends a wrong signal to Iran. And then on the other hand, you've got other MPs saying on the left of the party, says this just doesn't go anywhere near far enough. This is only a tiny first step in the right direction. So it's sort of, it doesn't, I'm not sure how much it helps that internal Labour politics, because you've got two sides who are very, very far apart from each other. Then you bring in the US, and it's really interesting looking at the difference between what the US is saying publicly, what their spokespeople are saying publicly, and then what senior government sources have told the Times about what the US is saying in back channels. So publicly, absolutely, they've said what Ali has said, but they've also sort of been clear. The UK is a sovereign state. It's entitled to make its own assessment. The US will be making its own assessment, and we're not affected by the UK, and our assessment is this, and we will keep that under review. So that's the sort of public, quite polite, you know, UK can do what it wants, but we've got our own sort of view. But what a government source, so that's one of our government sources, has told the Times, is that the US had privately warned the UK against suspending arms sales because they were worried about two things. First of all, I think the message it sends to Iran, and secondly, concerns that it might interfere with these attempts to broker a ceasefire. And, you know, there was a feeling that we might have got quite close last week and it didn't happen. And the longer it goes on, the more lives are lost in Gaza and the more hostages. You know, we had that awful story about hostages losing their lives, being murdered by Hamas. So, there are people who are trying to make the ceasefire happen, and certainly, if we're to believe the briefing, the US thinks that it could undermine that because it could give succor to Iran and therefore Hamas. Yeah. So it's genuinely really difficult because I think there have been clear signals from both the UK and the US that they think Israel has gone too far, isn't doing enough in terms of international aid. The UK clearly feels that actually a stronger signal does need to be sent that is in line with international law. There now may be a difference of opinion with the US. But I'm not sure where this leaves any of us in terms of the actual conflict.
Yes, and the delicacy of timings like this, certainly on the day, funerals for those hostages you mentioned, or some of them were taking place. Let's go to The Guardian now. Pressure elsewhere for Sir Keir Starmer, this on winter fuel payments for pensioners. Question, was he going to face a challenge in the Commons? What's the answer from this article?
Well, he may face a challenge in the coming days because there's going to be a vote on this legislation coming up. And this is a bit of a headache for Keir Starmer because for two reasons. One, it was not mentioned in the Labour manifesto. This was not talked about at all. And secondly, a lot of people are thinking, hang on a second, I thought we voted for a Labour government here. I would use we in a broad sense here. So people feel a bit let down by this. Labour is meant to be on the side of the people who are vulnerable. Yes, there are 11 million pensioners who'll be affected by this. This will raise about 1.5 billion. And there are 1 million pensioners, apparently, that should be signing up to means-tested benefits who are not on that yet. So, yes, they should be doing it.
And if they did, you'd lose money at the end of this.
You would lose money, but the government's trying to encourage them to do it. But still, it does seem, where Rachel Reeves is rolling the pitch for this big October the 30th announcement, this big budget that's going to come out, that they want to target pensioners. I mean, some people would say, well, look, the pain's got to be spread around somewhere. And intergenerational inequality-wise, take a little bit from pensioners to try and give it to younger people below 50.
And the point about the manifesto, it had been mentioned in other manifestos, just not this election. So had they planned this all along? It's a kind of trust issue at this point, isn't it, I suppose?
It's a very tricky one, again, because there is no question that tough financial decisions have to be taken. And Rachel Reeves' argument is, hang on a second, we got into government and there's £22 billion of unfunded spending commitments that we didn't know about, a £22 billion gap in the budget.
But were they hasty specifically on this policy, in your view? Were they hasty to make this decision?
Well, I think they should have done it in a different way. So, personally, from a substantive perspective, winter fuel payment goes to all pensioners. There are some very wealthy pensioners who don't need it. The problem is when you cut it off at the only pensioners who will get it now will be pensioners in receipt of means-tested pensions credit. There are some who should be getting it and don't claim it and will therefore lose this money, who really need it. And then there are some pensioners just above the line, and that's tricky. So if I were the government, I think it is a fair place to look to save money in very difficult times. And there have been nasty surprises for the Chancellor. But I think it shouldn't have been withdrawn so harshly, or it shouldn't be withdrawn so harshly going forward. And I think it could, I mean, no question there's a lot of Labour MPs who are getting pressure from their constituents on this. The thing is that Starmer set a precedent before the summer when he suspended Labour MPs who voted against the government on basically wanting the two-child benefit cap to be lifted. Those MPs got suspended. If they abstained, they were fine. If they voted against the government, they were suspended. So I suspect that might quash the rebellion this time, because people will look at that and think, well, if we vote against the government on this, we might be out, of the sort of parliamentary Labour Party, at least on a temporary basis. So I suspect that the rebellion won't be as big as it would have otherwise have been.
Yeah. In the meantime, the overtures to Europe, if that's the way to describe it, what to do about youth mobility, and, for example, for bans touring Europe. The Financial Times suggesting that his shout-out... Oh, that's the wrong one, is it? I think I'm on the FT. Oh, there we go. I think I've jumped a story. My fault. I'll go back to that one. Yes, it's falling on deaf ears is the point this article's trying to make.
Yeah, look, Keir Starmer's trying to make overtures to the EU. He wants a better relationship with them on many, many grounds. One of them is to allow bans to tour. He also wants younger people to actually be able to enjoy the freedoms in the EU as well, and also wants fewer checks at the borders. None of these things at the moment the EU is playing ball on at all. Now, this is all a bit sad, because there was a bit of a love-in with, was it Olaf Scholz the other day, I think he spoke to? Yeah, there was a bit of a love-in there. And Macron. But nothing's really coming of this yet. But it is early days.
But see, the issue is the EU wants to give us some... They either want to have a substantive deal with us, something like, reforming a customs union. They don't want to be doing these little bits of cherry-picking. It's not worth it. There's actually something big they want, which is a youth mobility scheme. Will Labour do that? It's problematic for Labour because they've got to deliver growth. Closer ties with the EU would be one way to do it, but these little teeny bits and pieces... they're not going to get us there, and the EU would want something more substantive. Yeah.
The story I jumped, I think I'll do after the break.
OK.
That's another one.
That's because we've talked too long, I imagine.
No, it's not. It's because I jumped it. Anyway, still to come on the press preview, The Guardian leading on the Channel tragedy, which saw at least 12 people, including children, killed after their boat tore apart.
Push the protesters further back here. There's around 200 or 300 still remaining.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
This van goes onto the streets of Plymouth 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
These facilities at the moment are a lifesaver. It's all we've got.
From fishing communities to bustling cities, we spend every day reporting from across the region, hearing from people who have real stories.
I'm going to have nowhere to live for about 3 or 4 months.
There are still people inside the properties here.
They're coming from the epicentre of what is now a global health pandemic. We were seeing and speaking to young women who were selling themselves right on the high street. It was desperately sad, and the fact it was happening right in the heart of this community. Before Brexit, these oysters were being exported to the EU, but the trade stopped overnight.
What's your feeling about the future then?
Bleak. might all be finished, I don't know.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Sonia Soda and Ali Miraj. Welcome back to both of you. Sonia, The Guardian, the latest tragedy in the Channel. 6 children, your paper saying, or your sister paper saying, among the 12 dead on what seems a very overcrowded boat that literally ripped apart.
Yeah, it's just awful. So there were 70 passengers on this boat. We know at least 12 people have died. 6 of them were children, including a pregnant woman. 10 of them were female. And that makes it the second worst tragedy in the Channel since the small boats crisis started. So it's a really dreadful reminder that, you know, we've had an election here in the UK, but there are still these traffickers operating boats off Calais, people paying, you know, a lot of money, their last sort of cent to, you know, to these people to get them to cross the ocean, and the Channel rather, and they are on incredibly dangerous vessels. Often it's no more than a dinghy, overcrowded. Just 7 or 8 of the people on the boat, the passengers, were wearing life jackets out of 70. It's mortal peril. But these people are so desperate to get to the UK to claim asylum, and you know most of the people on this boat were from Eritrea. Eritrea's got sort of a terrible they're fleeing conflict, terrible human rights abuses, and you know they're crossing and so it's a reminder that Labour has scrapped the Rwanda scheme, I think quite rightly, because there are a lot of people who think that it had no chance of working as a deterrent and it put us in conflict with international law. But there is still this issue of the small boats, and quite frankly, no one really knows what to do about it. If they tell you they do, they're lying. We've seen, in the same with the Mediterranean, nothing really has worked in stopping people crossing the Mediterranean.
Well, we know from Yvette Cooper that those who were working on the Rwanda scheme have been transferred to clearing the asylum backlog.
Yes.
In terms of this and this issue that this criminal enterprise is making it even more overcrowded, 51 people from the boat were saved, according to rescuers. 2 are in a critical condition. Fewer than 8 people were wearing life jackets. And the PA News Agency has analysed Home Office figures, suggesting that actually the boats are indeed becoming more overcrowded. They've extrapolated the number of boats with the numbers who have been on them, and found that now they're packing an average of 52 on each craft. In 2022, that was 41, that figure. So, sending people to their deaths.
It's an awful business model, and this is the summer months, so you see the crossings go up in the summer, and it's absolutely appalling. Look, hearts goes out to people who actually are, perishing, putting their lives at risk, paying unscrupulous people smugglers the best part of 7 to 12 grand a pop for the pleasure of putting their lives at risk, and sadly perishing in this way. Sonia says there's no evidence for the Rwanda scheme. Look, there may not be, but what we do know is there have been some limited interviews that were done before the scheme was scrapped, and people were saying, if it's scrapped, we'll wait for Labour to come to office. And they're like now rubbing their hands with glee. I mean, look, none of this is easy. This is a big global problem.
And Labour will find out how hard it is.
Well, it is very hard. And I understand that Labour wants to put this new border force in place and bring MI5 people together with the police and border force and all the rest of it. Nothing has worked. The thing is, we don't know if the Rwanda scheme would have been the deterrent. I mean, it was never tried. It was very expensive. It was never tried.
20 seconds on our last story, the one I jumped. Angela Rayner in talks to end Thatcher's right to buy. Very quickly.
About time from my perspective. This is basically a scheme that gives people a big discount when they buy their home. It costs government a lot of money, and there's big questions about should that subsidy be concentrated on people in council housing who want to get just over the line when there's so many people who are trapped outside of the housing market. And actually, I think it would be better invested in affordable homes to rent for young people and low-income people.
OK, we can discuss that more, no doubt. Sonia, Ali, lovely to see you both. Thank you. Here's the weather.